Okay, so the importance of renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system also we have discussed. Okay, which is important for what we say, sodium balance. Okay, now let us see how sodium is regulated. Okay, simply we can also say that suppose there is a hypotension, or let's say there is low blood pressure, or another condition maybe there is low sodium concentration in the extracellular fluid. Okay, so the condition is hypotension or low sodium concentration in the extracellular fluid. So you already know this one also when we talk about juxtaglomerular apparatus also we have discussed, but I want to repeat here. Okay, so you already know that what it will affect. Okay, when blood pressure is low or there is low sodium concentration in the extracellular fluid, it will stimulate the amygdala densa cells in the kidney. You already know these are nothing but osmoreceptors, and it will stimulate renin to be released from the juxtaglomerular cells. Okay, and what is the function of renin? You already know it converts angiotensinogen, which is produced by liver, to angiotensin 1. Okay, and this angiotensin 1 again, it will be converted into angiotensin 2 by angiotensin converting enzyme. This is mainly coming from lungs. Okay, SCE. Okay, now we have angiotensin 2. Okay, this angiotensin 2, as you know, it is having so many effects that we have already discussed in the previous classes. Okay, now here I want to point out only one function of angiotensin here regarding the control of blood pressure. It is angiotensin to release aldosterone from the adrenal cortex. This one also you already know. Angiotensin 2, then it will stimulate release of aldosterone from the zona glomerular cells of adrenal cortex. Okay, now you know what is the function of aldosterone. It stimulates sodium reabsorption in the renal tubule. Okay, and you know that whenever there is sodium reabsorption, I've already told you, water will follow. Okay, reabsorption of water will also take place. So sodium and water, they are going back to the bloodstream. Okay, so it will lead to normalization of sodium concentration, as well as the BP will become normal. Okay, hypotension will be, what to say, neutralized. Okay, because there is more gain of water to the extracellular fluid, so it will increase the blood pressure. That means it will move towards the higher level. So this hypotension, it will be suppressed or it will be neutralized, so that the blood pressure will become normal. So here, sodium is very important in controlling blood pressure. Okay, so on the other hand, when there is hypertension, okay, or high sodium in the extracellular fluid, okay, so the opposite thing, this I've already told you, this will be there. Okay, one point will be that there will be no stimulation of this medulla densa cells, no release of renin, no angiotensinogen conversion. That means ultimately no aldosterone release will be there. Aldosterone will not be released. So because of that, large amount of sodium, they will not be reabsorbed and they will be excreted in the urine along with water. Okay, that means hypertension means there is, suppose if there is hypertension here, there will be the sodium level and blood pressure will become normal again because there is loss of water. Okay, you just imagine the opposite condition of this one. That means hypertension instead of hypotension, and here high sodium concentration in the extracellular fluid. Okay, so it means that all this process will not take place. So the ultimate effect will be no aldosterone will be secreted. So because of that, no reabsorption of, okay, reabsorption of sodium will be decreased, and this will also be followed by water. Water will also be lost in the urine to a great extent. That means the blood pressure will go down. Okay. So another factor is that when there is hypertension or high sodium concentration in the extracellular fluid, this will stimulate atrial natriuretic factor or peptide, in short ANF or ANP. Okay, and this is released from the atria. Okay, heart, you already know. So what is the function of this ANF? It will inhibit renin and aldosterone release. Okay, and there will be decreased reabsorption of water and sodium in the renal nipples. Okay, just like I told you, the previous one, the opposite thing will happen means inhibition of renin means inhibition of aldosterone release. Okay, no aldosterone means reabsorption of sodium and water in the renal tubule, it will be suppressed. Okay, that means large amount of water and sodium, they will be excreted from the kidney, and then the blood pressure will go back to normal. Okay, this will suppress the hypertension, and the blood pressure will go down towards the normal level. Okay, so the second one, potassium balance. So potassium is the major cation of intracellular fluid. So unlike the sodium, okay, potassium, it is very high in concentration inside the cell, but outside it is low. Okay, that one you already know very well. And potassium is the major cation, okay, positively charged ion in the intracellular fluid. Okay, as with sodium, it is extremely important in correct functioning of excitable cells such as muscle, neurons, sensory receptors, etc. Okay, so you already know the importance of potassium regarding excitation of excitable cells. That one also we have already discussed so many times. Okay, means when we talk about action potential, okay, we are always concerning this sodium and potassium. Okay, potassium also, it is causing all these potassium gases there. It is opening slowly, closing slowly. All these things also I've already told you. So potassium is very important in controlling or in maintaining action potential. Okay, so that is why it is very important for impulse transmission as well as for the contraction of muscle also. Okay, potassium output is usually equal to potassium input. That means if input is excess, the excess will be removed from the body. Okay, sodium reabsorption by aldosterone is usually in exchange from either hydrogen or potassium ions. This you already know. Okay, we have already discussed about this one. Okay, so many times, because this aldosterone, it is causing sodium reabsorption. It causes sodium reabsorption. At the same time, it is causing potassium excretion in the TCT and collecting tubule. That one we have already discussed. There is an exchange. That means they are antiport transmission, transport is there. Okay, they are transporting in the opposite direction. Okay, so therefore, if sodium ions are reabsorbed more, potassium is lost and vice versa. It means whenever there is reabsorption of sodium, there will be reabsorption of potassium, secretion of potassium ions into the urine. Okay, thus high levels of potassium in the interstitial fluid simulate aldosterone response. Okay, when there is high level of potassium in the blood, it will simulate the aldosterone also, so that more amount of potassium can be excreted into the urine. Okay, to maintain the normal concentration of potassium in the extracellular fluid. Okay, what about calcium and phosphorus balance? Calcium is found mainly in the extracellular fluid. Okay, calcium is found mainly in the extracellular fluid. Again, its concentration is very much higher in the extracellular fluid as compared to the intracellular fluid. However, phosphorus is found mostly in the intracellular fluid. Okay, both are important in maintenance of healthy bone and teeth. Okay, so because bones and teeth, they are mainly composed of this calcium phosphate. Okay, so that is why calcium and phosphorus, they are very important for the maintenance of the healthy bone and teeth. Calcium is also important. So we already know that so many functions are there. Can any one of you tell me what is the function of calcium, okay, in transmitting impulse from one excitable cell to another one? Anyone can tell me what is the function of calcium in excitation?
Sir, calcium helps to dissolve the vesicles that contain neurotransmitter.
Yeah, very, very good. Okay, very good. So we cannot just say that calcium is having this role. Okay, actually it is having so many functions. Okay, even for blood coagulation. Okay, calcium is very important. Okay, I think Madam might have discussed this already in coagulation of blood. Okay, so calcium is also important for transmission of nerve impulses across the synapses. Okay, this one also we have already discussed, especially in the cardiac muscle and all. We have discussed all these things, clotting of blood, contraction of muscles. Okay. So, okay, I want to ask you one question again. What is the role of calcium for the contraction of muscles? Exact role. Okay, transmission of impulse from nerve to the muscle. Okay, it is doing that. It pulls the vesicles, okay, to release the neurotransmitter. But when axon potential is passing through the muscle fiber, okay, so calcium is having another role for muscle contraction. Can any one of you tell me what is the function of calcium for that? At the molecular level, yeah, then okay, very good. Okay. So we'll move to the next slide. If calcium falls below normal level, both muscles and nerves become more excitable. Okay, that means a low level of calcium will make muscle and nerves become more excitable. That means they may be easily excited. That means muscle and nerves will be easily excited if calcium level falls below normal. Okay, phosphorus is required in the synthesis of nucleic acid, high energy compounds such as ATP. Okay, these are the functions. It is also important in the maintenance of pH balance. We already know this, we have already discussed. Okay, phosphate group in maintaining acid-base balance. Okay, now let us see this flow chart. Okay, a low level, suppose there is low level of calcium in the extracellular fluid, the concentration of calcium in the extracellular fluid goes down. Okay, what it will do is that it will stimulate parathyroid gland. Parathyroid gland, it is located in the neck region near to the thyroid gland. Actually, this will be discussed in more detail when we talk about endocrinology. Okay, but here we'll just discuss in brief. Low level of calcium in the extracellular fluid stimulate parathyroid gland, and parathyroid gland is synthesizing or having parathyroid hormone. So this will be released into the bloodstream. Okay, and this blood will carry the parathyroid hormone towards the bones and teeth. Okay, and PTH, this parathyroid hormone, it will stimulate bone and teeth to release calcium and phosphate, because we know that bones and teeth are mainly composed of calcium phosphate. Okay, then PTH will stimulate bone and teeth to release calcium and phosphate. Then this calcium and phosphate, they will be released into the blood. Okay, calcium and phosphate levels return to normal in extracellular fluid. Okay, so this low level will become normal again because there is more concentration of calcium and phosphate in the extracellular fluid. Okay, so another function is that there is also decreased calcium and phosphate excretion by the kidney. That means reabsorption will be more. Okay, then this will further increase the level of calcium and phosphate in the extracellular fluid, so that the level of calcium and phosphate will go back to normal. So here we know that one important hormone is involved, that is the parathyroid hormone. Okay, you just remember this one. So suppose, on the other hand, when there is high levels of calcium in the extracellular fluid. Okay, so the concentration of calcium is high in the extracellular fluid. Okay, instead of stimulating the parathyroid gland, it will stimulate the thyroid gland, and thyroid gland will release a hormone known as calcitonin. Okay, what is the function of calcitonin? It will inhibit release of calcium and phosphate from the bone and teeth. Okay, so this calcitonin hormone, it works. Okay, its function is just opposite to that of the parathyroid hormone. Okay, opposite to parathyroid hormone. So calcitonin, it will cause inhibition of calcium and phosphate release from the bone and teeth. What does it mean? Okay, calcium and phosphate level returns to normal. Because it is going down, this high level will be suppressed. Okay, it will suppress so that the level will go down to normal level. Okay, another one is that at the same time there will be increased calcium and phosphate excretion by the kidney. Okay, reabsorption decrease, so that this will further increase calcium and phosphate levels in the extracellular fluid. So the ultimate effect is that the calcium and phosphate levels will return to normal level in the extracellular fluid. Okay, what about magnesium? So magnesium, most magnesium is found in the extracellular fluid and bone. What are the functions? They are important in maintaining sodium, potassium pump, as an aid to actions of enzymes. It plays a role in muscle contraction, exon potential, conduction, bone and teeth production, as well as blood clotting. Aldosterone controls magnesium concentration in the extracellular fluid. Low magnesium levels result in an increased aldosterone secretion. Aldosterone increases magnesium reabsorption by the kidney. So this point is important. Okay, as far as physiology is concerned, you know that this is again magnesium balance is controlled by aldosterone. When the level of magnesium in the extracellular fluid is going down, this will stimulate aldosterone secretion, and aldosterone, it will stimulate magnesium reabsorption by the kidney so that the level will go back to normal. What about chloride balance? Okay, chloride is the most plentiful extracellular anion because it is carrying negative charge. Extracellular fluid concentration of chloride is 26 times that of its intracellular concentration. So there is a big difference between regarding the concentration of chloride inside and outside of the cell. Okay, chloride ions are able to diffuse easily across plasma membrane. Their transport is closely linked to sodium movement. This you already know when we talk about the reabsorption of sodium. Okay, in the proximal convoluted table. Initially, it will prefer, I already told you, initially sodium will prefer glucose and amino acid to be reabsorbed. That is, support transport was there. Okay, both of them, they will be reabsorbed to the inside of the cell. But when amino acid and fatty acids are no longer available, and then sodium will be co-transported with the chloride ions that we have already discussed. Okay, this explains the indirect role of aldosterone in chloride regulation. Okay, when sodium is reabsorbed, chlorine or chloride ions follow passively. It helps to regulate osmotic pressure differences between fluid compartments, and chloride is also important for pH balance. Okay, what about pH balance? pH balance is nothing but the maintenance of the hydrogen ion concentration. Okay, pH is a measurement of the hydrogen concentration of a solution. Lower pH values indicate a higher hydrogen concentration or a higher acidity. Okay, so lower pH means high acidity. Higher pH means low acidity. Okay, so it is just opposite. You just remember this one. I think you already know very well about this one. Therefore, hydrogen ion balance is often referred to as pH balance or acid-base balance. Okay, acid-base balance. Okay, renal control of acid-base balance also we have already discussed. Okay, hydrogen ion regulation in the fluid compartments of the body is of critical importance to health. Even a slight change in hydrogen ion concentration can result in a marked alteration in the rate of chemical reaction. So shifting of a pH, okay, to a small extent also it is very dangerous because it will hamper many of the chemical reactions inside the body. Changes in hydrogen ion concentration can also affect the distribution of ions such as sodium, potassium, and calcium. Okay, so when there is shift in the pH also, it will affect distribution of sodium, potassium, and calcium. So ultimately, it will affect the fluid balance. Okay, in different compartments. Okay, it also can affect the structure and function of protein. Okay, so changing the hydrogen ion concentration, it can change structure and function of the protein. So some protein will be affected, their function will be affected. So it will hamper many metabolic pathways. Okay, when the pH changes in the arterial blood, two conditions may result: acidosis or alkalosis, that we have already discussed. Acidosis is a condition which occurs when the hydrogen ion concentration of the arterial blood increases. Okay, and therefore the pH decreases. Alkalosis is the opposite condition, the condition which occurs when the hydrogen ion concentrations in the blood, arterial blood decreases and the pH increases. Okay, I'll not repeat this one. You already know very well this one. Sources of hydrogen ions in the body include carbonic acid, phosphoric acid, and ketone bodies. Okay, abnormal fat metabolism may lead to accumulation of ketone bodies and lactic acid. So we know lactic acid also in muscle fatigue we have already discussed, okay, which increases the pH. About half of all acid formed or introduced into the body is neutralized by digestion of alkaline foods. Actually, we may ingest acidic food or acid may be produced inside the body. Okay, that has to be neutralized by the alkaline molecules or alkaline substance. So by ingesting alkaline food also, you can neutralize this food. Okay, actually nowadays, what are the alkaline foods? What are the acidic foods? Also, it is there. Okay, in internet you can Google it. Okay, accordingly you can make the plan, your plan also. So it is always said that alkaline food, they are more healthier. Okay, the remaining acid is neutralized by three major systems of the body, namely. So half of them, they will be neutralized by ingestion of alkaline food, and another half, the remaining half, okay, it will be neutralized by, let's say, chemical buffers inside the body, bicarbonate ions, for example, you already know. Another one is respiratory system by expiring carbon dioxide. Okay, carbon dioxide, it is very acidic in nature, so we have to remove, because you already know that carbon dioxide, when it combines with water, it forms carbonic acid. Carbonic acid, okay, then it will produce hydrogen ions. And you already know kidney. In the kidney, you already know that phosphate group and amino buffer, all these things we have already discussed. Okay. Chemical buffers have an instantaneous effect on pH changes. They are very effective in minimizing pH changes, but do not entirely eliminate the change. Okay, chemical buffers, they are important in minimizing or in controlling pH changes, but they cannot entirely eliminate the change. Within cells, chemical buffer generally take about 2 to 4 hours to minimize changes in pH. What about respiratory system? Also cause to minimize pH changes. The effect occurs within minutes. Okay, renal regulation of pH is able to completely return the pH to normal and requires from hours to several days. So it is short, but it is very effective renal regulation, that acid-base balance. Okay, so that is the electrolyte balance. Okay, electrolyte balancing is a very big topic. We just have discussed. We have discussed in brief only. Okay, next is dehydration. You know very well what is dehydration. Okay, when water losses exceed water gains, a condition known as dehydration develops. That means water loss has exceeded water gains. Okay, output of the water from the body is exceeding input of the water. So when that balance is lost, okay, when more water is lost, then gain, dehydration will develop. And when dehydration develops, usually it will be accompanied by disruption of metabolic processes. Okay, so metabolic processes will be hampered. It occurs usually due to exercise. Okay, so this is normal, or it may be due to disease. Okay, or it may be high environmental temperature. We know very well when you do vigorous exercise, you sweat a lot. It means you are losing water from the body. Okay, so dehydration will take place. But usually we used to drink water immediately. Okay, so rehydration will take place again. But many diseases, they are causing dehydration. Okay, and even high environmental temperature, we know that there we used to lose more water. Okay, so we have to rehydrate our body again. Okay, in the elderly, blunted response to thirst, or inadequate ability to access free water in the face of excess free water losses, especially hyperglycemia related, seem to be the main cause of dehydration. So earlier I told you that when we talk about thirst, okay, so in elderly, okay, or in old people, that signal it is weakened. I already told you, so that they do not feel thirsty, although they may be dehydrated to a significant extent, but still they do not feel thirsty. So they do not feel the need to drink water. So because of that, they will be dehydrated. Okay, because the nerve signal, okay, the impulse which is sent to the thirst center, it is weakened in all people. Okay, another one is that when there is pathological condition like diabetes mellitus, like hyperglycemia, there hyperglycemia, it will lead to more excretion of urine, so they are more prone to dehydration. Okay, the extent of dehydration is variable, so it is clear that dehydration degree, okay, different degrees of dehydration will be there. Okay, it may be very mild. Okay, maybe you do not feel thirsty also. Okay, you may not feel thirsty, but your body is already dehydrated. We've already discussed about the threshold for ADH, threshold for thirst also. Okay, but at that time when you do not feel thirsty, but your body is already dehydrated, means I told you that ADH is already released for conservation of water, but you are not yet feeling thirsty at that time. Okay, this one also we've already discussed. When mild, physiologic mechanism may be adequate to re-establish water balance via the thirst mechanism is water is available. Okay, suppose now if it is a mild dehydration, okay, you feel thirsty, you simply drink water and then rehydration takes place. There is no problem. So the fluid volume will be balanced again. That means it will go up to the normal value. Okay, therapeutic measures like fluid replacement, treatment of underlying causes may be necessary when water losses are moderate to severe and related to a disease condition. So actually sometimes it is necessary to have a fluid replacement. Maybe you have to drink that ORS or intravenous injection of some Ringer lactate solution or glucose solution. Okay, may be necessary. Most people can tolerate a 3 to 4% decrease in total body water without difficulty or adverse health effect. Okay, so people can tolerate if they are dehydrated to this one 3 to 4%. That means 3 to 4% decrease in total body water. Okay, but we have to know that they may be able to tolerate it, but we have to know that there is still already hampering of some metabolic processes inside the body. Okay, at 5 to 8% decrease of body fluid volume can cause fatigue and dizziness. Loss of over 10% of body water can cause physical and mental deterioration accompanied by severe thirst. Okay, all these things, it is very easy to understand. A loss of water equal to 10% of body weight is considered to be severe for most animals. That occurs at a loss of between 15 and 25% of body water. Okay, so this is a very severe condition. Mild dehydration is characterized by thirst and generally discomfort and is usually resolved with oral dehydration. We all know very well all these things. Okay. Dehydration can cause hypernatremia and is distinct from hypovolemia. Hypernatremia means increase in the sodium concentration in the extracellular fluid. Okay, when you are dehydrated, that means there is loss of only, let's say, water. Ultimately, hypernatremia will be there because the sodium is not lost, it will be more concentrated. In dehydration, the immediate source of water loss from the body is the extracellular fluid. Okay, immediately when there is dehydration, okay, the water loss will be first from the extracellular fluid, and this will be followed by a shift from the intracellular fluid to the extracellular fluid. That means intracellular fluid water, they will move out of the cell into the extracellular fluid. Okay, the concentration of electrolytes in the body fluids do not continue to increase during dehydration but are excreted by the kidney in proportion to the water loss. Actually, when there is dehydration, most of the time there is also loss of the ions. With continuing dehydration, water and electrolytes are depleted. Therefore, rehydration requires not only water but also appropriate electrolytes. Okay, so usually when there is dehydration, okay, which is usually accompanied by which is caused by pathological condition. Usually, we cannot take only water. Okay, you have to be supplied with some electrolytes also, because usually it will be loss of water as well as the electrolytes. Okay, throughout history, certain animals have had to adapt conditions of water lack because of their habitat. Okay, so we know that different animals, their heat tolerance, or what we say, their tolerance to water scarcity, it is different. Okay, many animals, okay, some animals, they may be able to adapt easily. Okay, but for some, it is difficult. Okay, however, little adaptation has been necessary for cattle, swine, dogs, and cats. Okay, the problem is compounded by exposure to high temperature. We all know Indian cattle breeds like Zebu and Brahman are more tolerant of heat than European breeds because of greater sweating and hence cooling, and not because of any special water conservation mechanism. Okay, the thing is that this indigenous breed of cattle, they have more sweat glands. Okay, they can sweat a lot. Okay, so they can cool themselves. Okay, because of sweating, so they are more tolerant to heat as compared to European breeds. Okay, camels and sheep, however, have adapted for coping with periods when water is not available. So we know very well about the camels, their tolerance to heat. Okay, they can survive for many days without drinking water. Okay. So fluid therapy, the last topic for today's class. This fluid therapy, it is what we say, clinical topics. Intracellular dehydration refers to the loss of water from inside the cells. So let's see what is intracellular dehydration. It refers to the loss of water from inside the cell. Okay, from inside the cell, there is loss of water, typically caused by an increase in blood osmolality, which draws water out of the cell by osmosis and causes them to shrink. That one also we have already discussed. Okay, when we talk about osmoreceptors, when we talk about thirst. Okay, because of high concentration of solute outside of the cell, water move out of the cell. Okay, that is causing intracellular dehydration, and the cell will shrink. Intracellular dehydration can be corrected by drinking water alone. So this point is important because there is only loss of water from the inside of the cell to the outside of the cell. So you can correct intracellular dehydration by simply drinking water only. Okay. What about extracellular dehydration? It refers to a decrease in the total blood volume, such as occurs during bleeding or hemorrhage. Okay. It means there is a loss of blood. We can say blood because of bleeding or hemorrhage. Okay. Extracellular dehydration requires consumption of both water and salt. Salt, in a sense that this is electrolytes, in order to generate the blood at its correct osmolality. Because when there is bleeding, there is not only loss of water, but also loss of salt or electrolytes. Okay. So because of that, if you want to rehydrate your body or body of the patient, you have to give water as well as the electrolytes. Okay. For this reason, extracellular dehydration triggers not only thirst but also salt appetite. Okay. So when there is extracellular dehydration, thirst will be there. Apart from thirst, there will also be a craving for the salt. Okay. You feel like taking more salt because you are also losing salt in the form of electrolytes. Okay. What is fluid therapy now? Fluid therapy is the administration of fluids to a patient as a treatment or preventive measures. Okay. Fluid therapy is the administration of fluids to a patient as a treatment or preventive measures. It can be administered via intravenous, that means through the vein, intraperitoneal into the peritoneum, intraosseous, that means directly to the bone marrow, subcutaneous below the skin and the subcutaneous tissue, or oral route, or to the mouth. Okay, so fluid therapy can be done by all these routes. Intravenous administration of fluids is typically the method of choice for fluid therapy. So we all know very well that IV injection of some fluid, it is the choice for fluid therapy. Okay, But suppose when you have some diarrhea or vomition, okay, usually we should take the fluid. You can take through oral route also, like ORS and all you should take. Okay. Fluid therapy is divided into two phases. Okay. Rapid replacement of water and electrolyte deficit known as rehydration phase. So the first phase is rapidly you replace the water electrolyte deficit. Okay. By the process of by using all these routes. Okay. You can use any of these routes or both also. Okay. And after that, when the immediate threat is immediate threat is overcome, you have to maintain again. You have to maintain this fluid balance by that is known as maintenance phase to infuse fluid to replace ongoing losses. Okay, so there may be ongoing losses in the form of sweating, okay, or in the form of excreting urine. So you have to maintain again that one. Okay, so the first one that you are overcoming the immediate threat by doing this fluid therapy, but after some time you have to maintain that. Fluid and electrolyte deficit should be replenished as rapidly as possible within 2 to 4 hours of initiation. Okay, so it is best to do it quick. The time recommended for rehydration in adult and young population is 3 and 6 hours respectively. In adults, 30% of the total required fluid is administered in the first half of an hour, where in young animals it is 1 hour. So there is a slight difference, okay, regarding adult and young people or animals. Okay. So what are the indications of fluid therapy? Fluid therapy is indicated either when there is a loss of fluid to any part of fluid compartments or a risk of loss of fluid. Okay, so we know that when there is dehydration, any kind of dehydration, we can say, or there is a risk of fluid loss, you can go for fluid therapy. Okay, the severity of fluid loss. Okay, so this point is important. The severity of the fluid loss and the compartment from which it has been lost influence the choice of fluid and the speed at which it needs to be administered. Okay, so severity and from which compartment fluid is lost, that will influence what kind of fluid you have to be administered and at what speed you have to be administered. Okay, the conditions which indicate fluid therapy are as follows: hypotension, you know that, low blood pressure; hypovolemia, low blood volume; electrolyte, metabolic, and acid-base disorder. So according to that disorder, you have to administer the fluid. Decreased oxygen delivery, geriatric, all patients at risk of organ failure. Okay, what are the types of fluid to be administered? Number one, the crystalloid. Okay, we will finish within 5 minutes. Okay, types of fluid. Number one, crystalloids. A crystalloid fluid is an aqueous solution of mineral salts and other small water-soluble molecules. Okay, so crystalloids, crystals we can also that, which is dissolved in water, aqueous solution, and it contains usually mineral salts and other small water-soluble molecules. Most commercially available crystalloid solutions are isotonic to plasma. So this is important. This crystalloid fluid, they are isotonic to plasma. That means they are having the same osmolarity. Okay, let's say 300 millismol per liter that we have already discussed, isotonic to plasma. Okay, same osmolarity with plasma. Therefore, these fluids approximate concentration of various solutes found in plasma and do not exert an osmotic effect in vivo. Okay, so it will not change the osmotic pressure inside the body fluid compartment because the osmolarity is similar to that of plasma. They are plasma volume expanders that contain electrolytes. Okay, they will simply increase the volume of the plasma. Okay, they can increase the circulatory volume without altering the chemical balance in the vascular spaces. So this is important, is that, as I told you, since it is not changing any osmotic pressure, okay, they will simply increase the volume of the blood and even, if necessary, intracellular fluid also. Okay. Crystalloid solutions are mainly used to increase the intravascular volume when it is reduced. Okay, when blood loss is there. Okay, you can simply increase the blood volume by injecting or infusing crystalloid solution. This reduction could be caused by hemorrhage, dehydration, or loss of fluid during surgery. Okay, crystalloid fluids are the first line choice for fluid resuscitation in the presence of hypovolemia, hemorrhage, sepsis, and dehydration. Okay, to bring back the fluid to normal level under the condition of like hypovolemia, hemorrhage, sepsis, and other dehydration, these crystalloid fluids are the first choice. Okay, normal saline, that is 0.9% sodium chloride solution, is the most frequently used crystalloid fluid. So you know very well normal saline also, because this is isotonic to plasma. So this is the most frequently used crystalloid fluid. Crystalloid fluids are administered parenterally via an intravenous infusion. Okay, so by through vein. Okay, this is administered. What are the second groups of fluid? Colloids. Colloids are gelatinous solution that maintain a high osmotic pressure in the blood. Okay, gelatinous solution which can maintain a high osmotic pressure in the blood. Okay, I'll go quick some more. Particles in the colloids are too large to pass semi-permeable membrane such as capillary membrane, so colloids stay in the intravascular spaces longer than crystalloids. Okay, colloids, they are larger than the crystalloids, so they cannot pass through the cell membrane. So they are maintained, or they are staying longer in the blood vessels. Okay, maintain plasma volume longer than the crystalloid. Examples of colloids are albumin, dextran, etc., indicated in burn, trauma, and surgery. So in this condition, you have to infuse. Okay, when there is burn, trauma, or other surgery, colloids are important. Okay, you can administer this colloid solution, and they are more expensive. Which fluid to administer now? Which fluid, crystalloid or colloid, we should prefer? Crystalloid and colloids are plasma volume expander used to increase admitted circulating volume. Over the years, they have been used separately or together to manage hemodynamic instability. Both are suitable in fluid resuscitation, hypovolemia, trauma, sepsis, and burns, and in pre, post, and preoperative period. Okay, so they are both important. On occasion, they are used together. Okay, it may be necessary to use together also. Let's see the crystalloids. They are less expensive, carry little or no risk of anaphylaxis. Hypersensitivity reaction is less in case of crystalloid. Pose no problem for the vegetarian or vegan patient because they are not derived from the animal source. What about colloids? Carry an increased risk of anaphylaxis. Okay, hypersensitivity reaction, it may be observed in case of this colloid administration, and they are more expensive also. Come with an added complication for vegetarian or vegan patient, as some preparation contains gelatin. So the meaning of this is that those who are vegetarian, okay, they may not like to infuse, okay, colloids, because colloid contain some animal, source, okay. Some part of colloids, they are derived from the animal source. However, colloid solutions are less likely to cause edema than crystalloid solution. So this is the advantage of colloids. It is less likely to cause edema. That means accumulation of fluid in the interstitial fluid. Okay, so this for today. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.